she said no more. May the Lord bless to us the reading of God's holy word. When Benjamin Franklin was the ambassador to France, he occasionally attended the Infidels Club. It's a group that would gather together to read novels and to read literary masterpieces. On one occasion, Benjamin Franklin read the book of Ruth to the club, but changed the names in it so it would not be recognized as the book of the Bible. And when he finished, his friends, the listeners, were unanimous in their praise. They said it was one of the most beautiful short stories that they had ever heard, and demanded that he tell them where he had run across such a remarkable work of art. He loved telling them that it came from the Bible. And because this love story is in the Bible, it's much more than just a romance novel. Romans 15:4 says, "For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through endurance and the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope." And that is why we are all here. Because we need the gift of hope. It is hope that brings us along this quest of life, that brings us into sanctuaries. So this story of Ruth is before us, and Ruth is with us as we celebrate what in the world this story has to say to each of us on All Saints Sunday. The events took place at a time when the judges ruled in Israel. There was no king. This was a period in which God's people would move from disobedience to defeat to deliverance. Because everyone did what was right in his or her own eyes, it led to chaos. Sin was rampant, and God's people had hardened hearts. And it was in that setting that we discovered this beautiful love story. You see, there was a bad famine in Bethlehem. So a man took his wife and his 2 sons to live in a country called Moab. The famine was a consequence, though, of the way Israel was treating their God. They had lost touch with God. Deuteronomy 11 says, "Be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods and bow down to them. Then the Lord's anger will burn against you, and he will shut the heavens so that it will not rain, and the ground will yield no produce, and you will soon perish from the good land that Yahweh is giving you." You see, they lost their memory. They lost their focus. They thought they deserved it. They thought they owned it. And so there was a distance between them and God. The nation had been enticed to turn away and worship other gods. And this Elimelech, whose name means God is king, left the nation and went to Moab. Moab was a land of rich soil and adequate rainfall, so this man traveled to a place where his crops would not fail. Why? Because there was a famine. And he had to take care of his family. The problem was he went to Moab. They traveled north to Jerusalem. And then they crossed the Jordan River by the fords of Jericho. And depending upon where they settled, the trip would have probably been about 100 miles. And it would have taken about a week. 7 near days to go from Judah to Moab. And yet it was an experience that would ruin his life. You see, in Moab, terrible things happened, didn't it? Elimelech died. 10 years later, his 2 sons died. You begin to wonder, where are you, Yahweh? And Yahweh says, I'm back over here. I didn't leave you. You left me. A lot of us identify with this story because we think we're going in the right way until 10 years later we look back in our rearview mirror and go, wow, how did I end up here? Every one of us is a prodigal. We all go the wrong route at some time or another, but God's sustaining power always draws us back to God. Now the characters in this story, this is this difficult name for me to pronounce, Elimelech. Everybody say Elimelech. Elimelech. I've been through celebrations of my two sons. They got married. It's all good. It's all good. But what happens when life is not good? What happens when Naomi's husband dies? What happens when her two sons die? You see, that's the intersection we find ourselves immediately in this story. It starts out with that great t-shirt, life is good. But what happens when your life is not good? Can you still wear the t-shirt? And for Ruth, she went from being a pleasant one to what she says in our scripture today. She says, I am the bitter one. I've lost my husband. I've lost my two boys. You see, to move from grief to grace takes such a long time, doesn't it? Grief work is just that. It is an experience that challenges us about who we believe and what we believe. And if we're in foreign lands and we're worshiping foreign gods, if we're in Moab, or if we're in Judah. Notice this, that when the sons married wives from Moab, Orpah and Ruth were from Moab. They were not from Judah. They were Gentiles. They did not have the same faith as Elimelech and Naomi. But they owned up into it. When they joined into the family, when they walked down that center aisle, they became part of Elimelech's life and heritage and faith. And that's the commitment that each of us wants within our family. Commitment, loyalty, fidelity. There's a story of a daughter who complained to her father. Her father was a chef, about how things were so difficult for her. Her father went to the kitchen, and Cajun cook sitting there together, Ken and BB, this is great. He boiled 3 pots of water, and then he placed carrots, eggs, and coffee beans in 3 separate pots. 20 minutes later, he took them out. He placed them in a bowl. And the father said to the daughter who was complaining, honey, what do you see in these bowls? She said, carrots, eggs, and coffee. The father asked her to feel the carrot, to break the egg, to sip the coffee. The daughter felt the softness of the carrot, noted that the egg was hard, and tasted the richness of the coffee. She then asked the father, Dad, what in the world are you doing here? What does this mean? And the dad said, each of them has faced the same adversity, boiling water, but each reacted differently. The carrot started out strong and tough and unrelenting, but after being subjected to the boiling water, it softened and became very weak. The egg had been fragile. Its thin outer shell had always protected the liquid that was inside of it. But after sitting through the boiling water for 20 minutes, its inside became hardened. And the ground coffee beans were unique, my daughter. After they were in the boiling water, they had changed the water. The father then asked the daughter, which are you? And I began to think about that. Every one of us goes through pretty much the same adversity. We all go through difficult things. We have a common bond in this small town that we live in. We experience a lot of the same things. Not exactly, of course, different life situations. But for the most part, we all go through adversity. Just like Ruth, just like Naomi, just like Orpah. But what we do with that adversity really determines who we really are. You see, for most of us, we get shaped by the adversity and we either become weak, lose our backbone, or we become